In an interview with L'Equipe in October last year, Richard Gasquet announced that he would be bringing his 20-plus year career to an end at this year's French Open. The now 38-year-old, widely regarded as one of France's most talented ever players, will soon hang up his rackets for good and end a career both as appreciated for his on-court elegance and artistry as it has been complicated by the weight of expectation placed upon him. Born in Béziers, France in 1986, Richard was introduced to the sport of tennis at a young age by his parents, Maurice and Francis, who ran a local club in Sérignan. First picking up a racket at the age of 4, it didn't take long for Richard's talents to catch the eye of former world number 9 Pierre Barthès, who ran a tennis camp at the nearby seaside resort of Cap d'Agde. By age 9, the young Frenchman was considered a tennis prodigy, and his obvious talents now began to gain national attention, with Richard being put on the front cover of the February 1996 edition of Tennis magazine. The tagline, translating as "the champion that France is waiting for," would underline the hopes that the nation had for Richard, even at such a young age. Making his debut on the junior tour just 3 years later, Richard would do nothing to abate expectations, dominating at under 14 level and claiming a number of titles early on, probably most notably the Le Petits Arts, where he would defeat Rafael Nadal en route to the title. Gasquet's junior dominance would continue as he amassed an impressive 54-11 record across all singles and doubles events, winning 2 junior Grand Slam titles at the French Open and US Open in 2002 to gain the junior world number 1 ranking. By this point, Richard had become one of the most anticipated junior prospects ever, and now not only did his nation expect, the world was watching as the young Frenchman would transition into the senior game. Off the back of his eye-catching junior performances, Richard would be granted a wildcard into that year's Monte Carlo Masters, becoming the youngest player ever to enter the draw at just 15 years and 10 months old. Not just satisfied with gaining main draw experience at tour level though, the French phenom would stun the former world number 11 Argentine Franco Scolari, battling past the former French Open semi-finalist in 3 sets to announce his arrival in the senior game. Richard would also enter that year's men's draw at Roland Garros, and another upset victory looked like it was on the cards as he took the opening set off the 20th seeded Spaniard Albert Costa, but he would ultimately fall in 4 sets to the man who would go on to then claim the title, only dropping 4 more sets over the course of the fortnight. As the Frenchman continued to rise up the rankings and push towards the world's top 100, he managed to claim what would end up being his only Grand Slam title in the mixed doubles at that year's French Open in 2004. However, 2005 would be his real breakthrough season, beginning the years on the fringes of the top 100 and ending it within the world's top 20. Gasquet would claim his first tour-level title in Nottingham, but perhaps his standout performance was his run to the semi-finals in Monte Carlo, defeating the world number 1 Roger Federer during one of his most dominant seasons, where he only lost 4 matches the entire year. Gasquet would then push Rafael Nadal, who had already begun to prove his pedigree on the red stuff by this point, to 3 sets, but ultimately fell just short in his first Masters 1000 semi-final. Over the course of the next couple of seasons, Gasquet would claim more lower-level titles on a variety of surfaces, proving that he had a game capable of competing with the top players at any tournament. He also advanced to his maiden Masters 1000 final in Canada, but despite taking the first set, Roger Federer proved too strong and would defeat the Frenchman in 3 sets. On face value though, it would look as though he was well on course to fulfill the promise of his junior career. However, up to this point, Gasquet was struggling to make an impression at the latter stages of Grand Slam events, and while he had enjoyed a rapid rise up the rankings, there were other talents emerging at the same time period who would start to become difficult roadblocks to navigate. You may recognise some of them. That was until his breakthrough at Wimbledon in 2007, where he overcame a 2-set deficit against the number 3 seeded American Andy Roddick on his way to the semi-finals. While that semi-final would ultimately end in defeat at the hands of prime Roger Federer, there was certainly no shame in that, and he captivated the fans with his aggression and precision off the backhand wing, as well as showing strong resilience and competitive spirit to battle back from 2 sets down against one of the best players in the world. That result would propel the Frenchman into the world's top 10 for the first time, and he would go on to qualify for the season-ending tour finals for the first time, being knocked out at the round-robin stage despite a notable victory over fellow rising star Novak Djokovic. Despite the heavy weight of expectation put upon him, Richard looked well on course to fulfill his undoubted talents. However, after an underwhelming start to the 2008 season, Gasquet's drive would be questioned in the French media, especially after his controversial decision to pull out of a crucial Davis Cup tie against USA's Andy Roddick. The Frenchman would see his performances and his ranking decline over the next couple of seasons, as the criticism from the media would only intensify, with seemingly everything from his physical conditioning and ability to perform in big moments to even the way he wore his baseball cap coming under scrutiny. Richard would admit to feeling burnt out and would pull out of that year's French Open, citing a knee injury, which would predictably draw more ire from his detractors. He would also decline the opportunity to represent his country at the Olympic Games, instead opting to get himself physically and mentally rested in preparation for the remainder of the season. In search of an answer to his declining form, he would make a coaching change, splitting from Eric de Blicker only to reunite with him 1 year later. Having dropped outside the world's top 20 by the end of the 2008 season, things would go from bad to worse in 2009 as Richard faced a significant off-court controversy when he tested positive for cocaine. Gasquet successfully argued that the substance entered his system inadvertently after kissing a woman at a nightclub, and the ITF cleared him of wrongdoing, but he would still be required to serve a suspension of little over 2 months. With his reputation at an all-time low, and many already skeptical of whether or not he was going to be able to fulfill his early promise, Richard would struggle for form and fitness, seeing his ranking drop even further during a near 3-year titleless run. That was until he was able to break through in Nice in May 2010, besting Spaniard Fernando Verdasco in the final. This would be the kickstart of the Frenchman's gradual resurgence up the rankings, and over the next few seasons, the Frenchman's game would noticeably mature, bolstering weaker elements of his game and committing to improving his physicality and conditioning. While a maiden major singles title would still seem a distant prospect, Richard would become a regular fixture in the second week of Grand Slam events, and would force his way back into the world's top 10 again in 2012, after a solid season where he made his first Masters 1000 title in Toronto, and won a bronze medal at the Olympics in the men's doubles with partner Julien Benneteau. The 2013 season would be Richard's strongest to date, amassing a 50-23 record, claiming 3 titles and becoming the first Frenchman in 14 years to reach the US Open semi-finals, following back-to-back epic 5-set victories against Milos Raonic and David Ferrer. He had gone to lose to Rafael Nadal in the semi-finals, but Richard was beginning to prove some of his doubters wrong, showcasing his greatly improved consistency as well as physicality and mentality. He would go on to finish the year inside the world's top 10 in consecutive seasons for the first time in his career, and would qualify for the year-end tour titles for a second time in his career, only to be unceremoniously dumped out of the round-robin stage, despite putting up strong efforts against elite opposition. Over the next couple of seasons, the Frenchman would claim 4 more titles, bringing his tally up to 14 in Belgium following a victory over Argentine Diego Schwartzman. But notably, all 14 of Richard's singles titles had one thing in common. They were all at 250 level tournaments, and while winning titles is never a bad thing, to be one of the best players in the game, as many had initially touted the Frenchman to one day be, you need to be able to win titles at the higher 500 and 1000 levels, and of course the dream of all professional players is to win one of the 4 major titles. However, despite another run to the Wimbledon semi-finals in 2015, Richard simply did not look like he would ever be a viable contender to win France's 30-plus year wait for a men's singles Grand Slam champion. And for all of the criticisms of his game style, physicality and mentality, perhaps the Frenchman's biggest obstacle was the fact that his peak years just so happened to coincide with what is considered to be a golden age of tennis. During his now 15 years as a professional, a staggering 43 of the 60 Grand Slam events contested during that period were won by one of just 3 men, the Big Three. This was a period of unprecedented dominance, and Gasquet was not the only man to suffer as a result of peaking during this era. Today, the Frenchman had clashed with Federer, Djokovic and Nadal 43 times and had amassed just 3 victories during that time, a record that speaks volumes. Nevertheless, while a major singles title looked beyond his reach, Richard would still be able to find glory representing his nation, and in 2017 he would claim the Hopman Cup before winning France their first Davis Cup since 2001, clinching a crucial doubles rubber with partner Herbert against the Belgians in the final. In 2018, Richard would earn his 500th win on tour, becoming the first Frenchman in the Open era to do so, and would also claim a 15th career title in the Netherlands, defeating compatriot Jeremy Chardy on the grass. However, he would continue to struggle to make progress in the Grand Slam events, being dumped out in the early rounds by familiar foes, and his season would ultimately end in further disappointment, being forced to pull out of the Davis Cup final through injury, where France came up just short in their bid to retain the title against the Croatians. Over the next few seasons, injuries and inconsistencies would begin to take over, Gasquet seeing his rankings slip outside of the top 50 for the first time in nearly a decade. Even with the established stars in this era now beginning to wind up their careers, the next generation were beginning to emerge, and the Frenchman would struggle physically to compete at the highest level as he had once done, despite the odd moments where the old magic would resurface, such as an impressive victory over world number 2 Daniil Medvedev in Geneva in 2022, which meant that he had now beaten the player ranked at every position within the world's top 100 in his career. Richard won his 16th and final title in 2023, his first for nearly 5 years at that point, as he defeated Britain's Cam Norrie in Auckland. He became the oldest Frenchman in the Open era to claim a singles title, and briefly returned to the world's top 50, as well as once again becoming the highest ranked French men's player during a down period for the nation. However, that would prove to be the highlight of his season, as he slumped to a 14-24 record and would drop outside the world's top 100 in early 2024, following a defeat to the rising Spanish sensation Carlos Alcaraz in the first round of the Australian Open, ending his near 20-year streak. Due to his drop in ranking, Richard would now need to play challenger events in an attempt to recover back up the standings, but despite achieving a 10th career challenger title in Cassis, Richard would not return to the world's top 100, and would fail to make it through qualifying in the previous 3 Grand Slam events, relying on a wildcard to make the French Open main draw, where another rising star, this time Jannik Sinner, dismissed Gasquet in straight set. So that brings us to the current day. With the French Open soon upon us, we'll be graced by Gasquet's on-court artistry for the final time, and his legendary career will come to an end. As we look back on Richard Gasquet's career, it's clear that while he may not have lived up to the immense expectations placed upon him as a prodigious junior, he still carved out a legacy that deserves respect. Competing in the same era of the likes of Federer, Nadal, Djokovic and Murray meant that his peak years unfolded in the shadow of all-time greats. But even so, Gasquet managed to achieve over 500 career wins, multiple Grand Slam semi-finals and a Davis Cup title. He'll definitely be most remembered for his elegance on court, especially that one-handed backhand, arguably one of the most beautiful the sport has ever seen. But for all of his flair, his relatively limited athleticism and physical durability may have been what held him back from breaking into that elite tier. Still, Gasquet's artistry, longevity and quiet resilience ensure that he'll remain a beloved figure in the history of French and world tennis.